trouble together at college, and I'll leave that to your imagination. You won't have to. Is that what you said? I said it as many times as I have driven by this church on my way to the coast and ridden bikes by here on the way to the coast. I've never been inside the church, so it's nice to be here. And thanks for singing along with my kids. We have, as you heard this morning, we have 8 kids, 6 girls and a boy on each end, so bookends. And we, like I say, we're not quite sure what caused it. Actually, we had an agreement to get, when we got married, to have 2 kids. And I lost the argument 6 times. So, yeah. So we have a very loud and boisterous home, and Dan Linrud, the conference president, likes to say that I've done more for church growth than any other pastor in this conference. So the passion of my life is the same as Paul's passion. And if you read in the book of Romans, Paul says that his passion was to preach where people have not heard the message before. And so we started a church in Colorado to reach non-churched people like I was when I was growing up, who did not know the name of Jesus, who did not know the Lamb of God, did not know any of that. And out of that has grown a passion that, the church was a different kind of church. For 11 years in Colorado, I didn't wear a suit and tie. I wore jeans to church. And we reached people in a much more casual feel. And it was a different animal to come back to the Northwest and put a suit on again. I had to go buy one because my old suits were out of style and everything else. But I realized that my passion wasn't to dress casual or to do church differently, but my passion was to reach lost people. And what we found in Colorado was we were one of the fastest growing, Joe Kidder at the seminary, Dr. Joe Kidder said, we were one of the fastest growing churches in the North American division. And he said one of the 10 fastest growing churches. And I realized that my passion was about reaching lost people, and the most cost-effective way we did that was through traditional evangelism. And so I have dedicated my life to doing evangelism, and we continue to do it. My church does 2 series a year, 2 major series a year. When Dan Linrud came to me and asked me to be the conference outreach director, I said I'll do it on 2 conditions. The first one is you leave me as the pastor of Vancouver Church, and the second one is you give me an associate to be an administrative pastor to pick up the slack. And he said yes, and my reason for doing that is primarily because so many people say to me, oh, traditional evangelism doesn't work anymore. And you can't say that to me because I am pastoring one of the fastest growing churches in Oregon, one of the fastest growing churches in the NAD today, and yet we do traditional evangelism. That's how we're growing. If I moved strictly into the conference office, then it would be easy for people to tell me, well, that's an old story. It doesn't work today. And so now you can't tell me that, okay? And out of that, where I'm going to this is out of that came this book that I wrote this year. It got published this year. It took about 18 years to write, I think. I don't know. Writing is not my passion. But Evangelism Intelligence, Why Adventist Churches Grow Differently. Some of the material that you heard this morning and that you'll hear this afternoon is in this book. I have copies available here in a box. You are welcome to have one. I have given away close to 1,000 copies of it because I tell people my dream is not to make a buck. My dream is to change the world. And now I'm about $2,000 in the hole on that because of that. But if you'd like to donate to that cause, I'll take your donation, but you can take a book with you if you'd like. Don't make that donation be a must. That's not where this is at. I just want I want to get the word out. I honestly believe that Jesus is coming soon. Amen. And the gift of evangelism, like I said this morning, is going to go away. And so I think we should do something significant with that. So I want to play you a video clip to get us started.
Imagine a church where every member is passionately, wholeheartedly, and recklessly calling the shots.
I have a busy work week, and by the time Sunday rolls around, I'm tired. So how about a church service that starts when I get there?
Can do. When you arrive, we begin.
This guy, he plays by his own rules. We want to find a church where if he starts screaming, we're not the bad guys, right? Come here.
Say no more. If your baby's screaming, you stay seated. The others around you can leave.
You know, financially, Sherry and I don't give a lot to the church, but we'd sure like to know who does.
All right, if you join now, you'll know what every person gives in detail.
When I'm in the church service, can my car get a buff and a wax?
Not just that, but an oil change and a tune-up.
Hey, how about tickets to the Super Bowl?
That's asking too much.
I'm serious. If I'm going to join, I want tickets to the big game.
All right, you join now and we'll get you there.
I like a pony.
Look in your backyard. Me Church, where it's all about you.
Do you want to go to Me Church? No. But honestly, if we are not reaching our community for Christ, right? If we are not, let's see if I can get that to advance here. There we go. If we're not reaching our community for Christ, it becomes Me Church very quickly, isn't it? Hey, how was church today? I didn't like the sermon, or the music wasn't that good, And so, but what is that saying? That's diving straight into consumerism, isn't it? And is that what we really want church to be about? Is about consumerism? Or do we want to design church in such a way that leads us to reaching more people for the kingdom? If the body of Christ is about reaching people, it takes away that concept of Me Church pretty quickly. I have found, I have been a pastor now for 31 years, and I've never been at a church board meeting where we have fought, tooth and nail. I've heard stories from other pastors where they actually got into fist fights in the middle of board meetings, where there's been yelling and raising of voices, and I'm just like, why? And I've come to the conclusion that the reason I have not is because every church I've pastored, I have focused them in on evangelism and outreach. And we had a lady at a church that I pastored at one point in time who we were talking about replacing the carpet. The carpet was, you remember the high and low shag? I called it topographical carpeting, okay? Because that's what it looked like, the topographical map. And it was red and black. It was an ugly carpet. And we began to talk about replacing it. And she says, if you take that carpet out of here, I want it because my dad helped put it in. I wanted to say, it would save me getting rid of it if you'd take it. By all means, you can have it, right? We ended up not doing it, but there was this tension there just about carpet. I'm like, it's carpet. But a year or so later, we did an evangelistic series where it was in Sweet Home, Oregon, okay? And Sweet Home had I don't know what the population of the community was, about 14,000 people. And the church had 40 people coming to church. The church sat 250 people. And opening night of our evangelistic series, 350 people shows up. We were the talk of the town. We generated 2 different articles in the newspaper. Front page, it was a once-a-week paper, right? But 2 different articles in the paper. But we became the talk of the town. We ended up, and long story short, we ended up baptizing 43 people in that series. We doubled the size of the congregation in 4 weeks. That same lady who was so upset that we would talk about changing carpet color began to get so involved in ministry that when it came time to actually change the color of carpet, she didn't care one whit about it at all. Because she organized socials around it, these new people to make sure they were coming, and she, it stopped the gossip chain, it stopped the infighting, it stopped all kinds of things. And so I said some of these things today. as I was a new Christian, I didn't know all the terms of Christianity. I said this one today. Alan B. White, I told you that one. Can you imagine that one? And if for no other reason you were listening long enough to hear somebody say, well, Sister White says, I mean, that's not Alan, right? Then I talked about the GC. Oh, there we go. And potluck. Or how about, why do we roll cradles around? I mean, think about from an outside perspective. What's cradle roll? Are we rolling cradles? Are the babies in them when we're doing that? Or how about Dorcas? I talked about that one. New Tina. I always wondered what was wrong with the old Tina, that we have to have new Tina. And so, we go through all these things, Loam and Linda, and then, of course, you can drop your tithes and your offerings. I'd love to drop my tithe in the offering, right? I want to walk you through something. Let's see if I'm not getting this. Wait, can you just get the other remote, plug it back into the computer there? He'll bring it up here. Maybe it's just running slow. All right. I want to show you a grid that explains how the culture of the church begins to shift and how the culture of the church can shift and work in a different fashion. This is a grid that is the unchurched non-Seventh-day Adventist. Underneath that, the blue panel is the churched but non-SDA. The next one is the unchurched Adventist, and then finally, the churched Adventist. Okay, let me walk you through that a little bit. Does this have a laser on it? Yeah, okay, so this orange box up there, the unchurched non-SDA, roughly about 70% of the crowd of unchurched people used to go to church. They have some Christian idea in their background. The statistics are 80% of Christians, 80% of Americans say they're Christian. I used to say I was a Christian before I knew anything about church or God or anything. But people would say, do you believe in God? Yeah. Are you a Christian? Oh, of course I'm a Christian. I knew nothing what that meant. I knew absolutely nothing what that meant. About 70% of the population are in a category that used to go to church or have some church background. At least they went, as my neighbor used to say, he was a C&E Christian. I said, what's a C&E Christian? He says, Christmas and Easter, right? And he said, but then there's about 25, 30% that are that have never had any background in church. Now that line between those two is slowly moving this way, okay? More and more of our society is going along and having no church background whatsoever. The people that I grew up with, that's where they were. If you go to the blue one, the non-church or the church non-SDA, there's two kinds of people that go to church on Sundays. They're passive. They do it because there's nothing better to do, or they're committed. And they're like you are. When the doors of the church are open, they're there, right? Okay, so that's the kind of people that go to church on Sunday. Is that purple, mauve, whatever color that up in the upper corner is? Whatever that color is. Burgundy, red, purple, blue, black. Anyway, upper right quadrant. Three kinds of people who used to be Seventh-day Adventists. There's the angry, bitter ones. They're ticked off. When you bring up Adventism, the blood boils. You know people like that, don't you? Okay? And then there's those who are passive, who are like, yeah, I was raised an Adventist, or I used to be an Adventist, and I don't know what happened. I just kind of dropped out. You know people like that probably too, don't you? And then there's those people that are close. They've talked about coming back. They want to come back. They would enjoy being back in church. They just haven't crossed the line yet. And then the last one, the green one, is the church Adventist. That's us. That's divided into three categories. That's the main body of people, and the DDDs. That's the definitely devoted disciples. Okay? The DDDs are those people that when the doors of the church are open, they're there. When Sabbath afternoon there's a visiting speaker about evangelism, they're there. Okay? So, they're the DDDs. Now, when you stop and look about it, who do we plan church for when we do things? When we have a church social, when we go on a hike, when we have a potluck, when we do Pathfinder programs or Sabbath school classes, who's it designed for? It's the DDDs, isn't it? Pretty much, almost most of what we do is down here in this category right here. And let's see if I can get that to, there we go. We kind of reach into the main body of people to some degree. They at least want to keep coming. But notice that they are the farthest away from the people who aren't going to church anywhere. That's why this diagram is built this way, just to show that the people we plan things for are the farthest away from the people who don't know Jesus. Does that make sense? So the question is, what would it be like if we moved that circle? What if we moved it towards the middle? What if we planned church to not be about us, but about people that are new in the faith, who are other Christians, who are close to coming back, or who are formerly church? What if we did church right in that circle so that the songs we pick, the messages we preach, the classes we teach, what if it wasn't about the already convinced, but it was about either the newly convinced or the unconvinced? How would that change church? It would change it a lot, wouldn't it? And it would significantly affect what goes on. I think it's important to understand that when you take a look at some of this stuff, church begins to move. And when we stand up front and we call everybody brothers and sisters, and people come in and they're going, I don't know if I want to be called a brother with you. I don't know if I believe like you do or not. And I tell my greeters, especially during evangelism, I don't want to see any hugs at the front door, because what happens for a guest as they come in is the person in front of them gets hugged. They're like, are they going to hug me? You know, I don't know if I'm ready for that. And so when you start talking about some of those things, we feel very good about it. But what happens when Aunt Mary gets up front? And we had a lady in a church that we all called her Aunt, whatever her name was, I won't tell you. But she would get up front and she'd sing off key, you know. And we were all just, that's okay, it's Aunt Mary. And we just love her, and she's just good lady, and we just are glad for her. But it changes the dynamics. If you bring someone to church who's in one of these basic areas, and they're sitting beside you, and Aunt Mary gets up front to sing, and she sings off key, and we go, you hear it for the first time. You know what I'm talking about? And I'm not saying we shouldn't have love for the Aunt Marys who sing off key. I'm not saying we have to do church perfectly. But what if we were decidedly thinking through things, that what we did at church was about making an evangelistic choice, making it available to everybody?
For thousands of years, the church has been a symbol of refuge and hope. Old or new, archaic or modern, this structure has long been home to the ideals of faith, hope, and love. But are these principles confined to live within these walls? Do they exist only among the pews and stained glass windows? Do they reside only in the Bibles and hymnals, to be opened at service and then laid to rest until we return again? Could it be that church is more than a building? Could it be a hand reaching out to someone in need? Could it be the embrace of a friend? Or could it be a random act of kindness? Could it be that church is more than simply a place? It is home to a calling that goes far deeper, a sanctuary, not built to confine us away from life's trials, but to empower us to share the love of Christ with those around us. It is an opportunity to work together and effectively touch a world in need. It is an opportunity to be more than a building.
So, unless you think I'm here to change your church service, I'm not, okay? That's not what I'm trying to do. And I'm not trying to change church, but what I am trying to do is change the culture of a church. Does that make sense? And so what I want to do is create a culture of outreach and evangelism. And so I want to draw, this is going to be a pyramid. You can draw this if you want on a piece of paper. You'll also find the basics of it in the book, although I've adapted it some since that went into print. So I want you to understand that what we're trying to do is if we want to reach the community, how do we do that? And the foundational step of that is the base of the pyramid is friendship. We've built walls around ourselves as Adventists. We send our kids to different schools, like I said earlier. We listen to different music. We eat different food. We have different buildings. We go to different hospitals. We go to church on the wrong day. I'm saying that very much tongue in cheek. I hope you understand. Okay, because I believe the Sabbath completely. The foundation of it is breaking down some of those walls. And what I tell people all the time is if you're going to go get gas, go to the same station and go pay for it with the same person. Don't just give your card out the window crack and say, fill it up, and give your card out and let the guy slide it himself. Get out and talk to him. Or go inside and talk to the same cashier. If you go to the grocery store, don't go to the shortest line, go to the same line. Because slowly you can begin to learn somebody's name. Learn who your neighbors are. Prayer walk your neighborhood, and begin to walk around and praying through your community so you begin to learn people. Gail and I, we walk every day. And we've just been doing this for years. And what happened was we bought a house. The house was 40 years old when we bought it. We were the second owners. And they said, oh, you bought the Johnson house. I'm like, okay, yeah. Well, how do you know? The Johnsons. Well, Mr. Johnson used to sit there. The front of the house was the kitchen, and it was windows. There was about 25 feet of windows that went along. And Mr. Johnson would sit in the kitchen on a stool, smoking a cigarette, drinking his coffee, and waving as everybody drove by. And when we heard that, Gail and I decided we were going to continue the tradition, not the smoking and the coffee, okay, but the waving. And so every time somebody would drive by, whether we were out in the yard or wherever we were, we would stop and we would wave. We still do it to this day. And we'll be walking along the road and we'll wave to people. And we're constantly, we just met somebody this last week for the first time. We've been in our house 8 years now. And we just met somebody this last week who says, oh, you guys are the ones that walk all the time. We'd never seen him before, but people go by us in their cars. But we were in St. Louis, Missouri one time, going for a walk. We just waved to people. They were looking at us like, who are you? What are you waving at us for? You need a ride? But we just have learned to wave. And one day somebody, we saw a garage sale. And so we walked over to see what was for sale in the garage sale. And the lady says to us, she says, oh, you're the Walkers. I'm like, well, no, we're the Walters. And then I realized, oh, no, yeah, because we're always walking. But we've made so many friends and been able to invite them to come to evangelism, to come to church over the years, just because we were nice to them. Friendship is a key to reaching people. And what I tell my church members is that we ought to be talking about this every week. In our pastoral emails, in our upfront announcements, in our testimony time, we ought to be talking about the people we're meeting so that we're casting that bigger vision about making friends in the community. And I will tell you that you run into problems when you start making friends in the community, okay? There are some significant issues that can happen. When I lived down in Lebanon in Sweet Home, I used to go fishing a lot, and I was all catch and release. I'm a vegetarian, and I've never liked fish, even when I wasn't a vegetarian. But I loved the fishing. I'd love standing in the water this deep and just nothing around. And back in that same time period, Verizon used to have this commercial about this guy out fishing, and he'd say, hello, he'd answer like he's in the office. And I'm like, I don't want to answer the stupid phone when I'm out fishing, right? But a guy I met worked for the Fish and Wildlife Department. And he taught me some things about fishing and this and that. When we left Sweet Home, that gave us a going away party, he shows up with a salmon casserole that he had made himself. Now, I had baptized his wife, but he had not come through and made a decision. But he was so glad for our friendship, he went and caught a salmon, fresh salmon, and made it into a salmon casserole. We're the guests of honor because we're leaving after 7 years in that church, or 8 years in that church. And so they're saying goodbye to us. They send us through the line first. I'm thinking, I'm not letting him go home with a full salmon casserole. I dish them up, and my wife dished them up. My wife's never eaten meat in her whole life, and she dished them up. And during the meal, she just fed it to our 1.5-year-old. She didn't eat it at all. She never even tried it. But what was really funny, though, is because everybody behind us was like, is that salmon casserole? And we're like, yeah. You don't get that at an Adventist potluck very often, So they dished it right up. It was gone faster than anything else, faster than the gluten steaks for sure. So, but here's the deal. This guy's name was Greg. We used to do barbecues at our house and volleyball. We had set up volleyball in the front yard and barbecues in the backyard. And what we would tell people, whatever you want to grill, you bring it. We'll provide the grills. Now, you understand something with me for a moment. I'm a vegetarian. I'm a vegan, okay? And I believe that it's better for you. But some people aren't ready to hear it yet. And I'm not going to force feed the health message on them. So I would say, whatever you want to grill, you bring. And then I'd go to the guys doing the grilling. They were friends. They were church members. And I'd say, can you cook my veggie patties on this grill and leave the pork chops over on that one? I don't, you know what I'm saying? But my friend Greg shows up, and we grilled hamburgers and chicken and veggie patties, and, we did everything. And we had a big table with all the spread, and we just had parties. And where I get this from is if you go to the book of Matthew, when Jesus calls Matthew comes and he accepts Christ, and he follows him. It says he immediately got up and left his tax collector's booth. And you can imagine the other disciples were going, you what? You want him to be one of us? But what does it say about Matthew? Matthew goes from there, and play with me with this story for a little bit. This is a Roger Walter paraphrase, okay? Matthew goes back to the office. And he goes back to the tax collector's office, and he's going to clean out his desk. He's got a cardboard box because he's going to get his pictures and everything. And he goes and he's like, man, I worked here for so long. And he's collecting stuff in his box. And he's picking up family pictures and pencils. And I got this award for collecting more taxes than anybody else. And, he collects all this stuff. He gets it all in a box. And he starts to walk out, and he stops, and he looks one last time over all the cubicles out there of all the other tax collectors. Man, I wish they could meet Jesus. I wish they could meet Jesus. I don't know how I do it, though. I'm just starting to follow him myself, but if they could meet Jesus. And then he has a wild idea. He says, I'm not very good at anything except throwing parties. Nah, that's a stupid idea. But the Bible says that Matthew threw a party, and his tax collector friends come with him. Right? Do you know the story? And in the story, there's, you can just picture that Matthew's walking around. He's a little nervous because all of his tax collector's friends are here, and his newfound Christian friends are here, and he's kind of walking around, and he's pondering, and he says, there's John. Look at he's talking to 3 of my friends, and he's telling them about Jesus, and there's James, and he's telling them about Jesus, and there's Peter. I hope Peter watches his mouth, and he's wondering what's going to happen, and in walk the religious heat, right? The Pharisees, the Sadducees, they walk in. And they're ticked. You claim to be a rabbi and you eat with sinners? And I just believe Jesus wore that like a badge of honor. And he's just like, I'm okay with this. And they end up leaving. And I just, again, in the paraphrase version, I feel like Jesus probably got Matthew by himself at the end. You know, James is cleaning up, and John's sacked out sleeping, and Peter's, you know, doing something, and everybody's kind of cleaning up. And Jesus sits down with Matthew, and he says, I love your heart, because all you wanted to do was introduce your friends to me. And so we have held what we've called Matthew parties for years. And like I say, it gets a little messy. What do you do when they bring pork chops? Okay? My friend Greg, the fishing guy, not only did he bring chicken or whatever else to grill and to play volleyball with, he drives up into my driveway. I'm out playing volleyball in my front yard. He's maybe from here to the sound booth away from me. And I'm just getting ready to hit. And he says, hey, Raj, what do I do with this? And he reaches into the back of his pickup and he pulls an 8-pack of beer up. And all my church members are looking at me. What's the pastor going to say now? And I said, put it in the fridge. I figured if it was in the fridge, it was out of sight of most of the people. And he's going to be thankful that it's cold, okay? If I made him say, put that in your back of your truck and don't bring it up here, what would that have said to him? Don't mishear me. I think alcohol is one of the biggest scourges of our society, okay? I really believe alcohol is... I don't know, there is a movement amongst Christians to begin to say a little bit of alcohol isn't a bad deal. And I'm like, whether you can prove it from the Bible or not is not my issue. My issue is, why would you support the industry that causes more problems in society than any other institution out there? So I'm not supporting of alcohol. Okay, he knew that about me. But I knew he wasn't ready to be told, don't bring it here. Now, people are uncomfortable with that. I get it. I'm uncomfortable with it. I'm not real happy with that either, okay? I'm not always happy with my answer that I gave him. But what I'm saying is, it gets a little messy when you begin to make friends in the community. Understand that before you go in. And number one, your best friends need to be people who are grounded in the faith. You cannot have your best friends in the community, because it's easier to drag someone off the table than it is to drag them up onto the table. And so make sure before you get out into the community that you have close personal friendships within the body of believers who will support you. Does that make sense? And so then that, if we're doing that, the next step would be kindness. Kindness projects, we call them. Let's go back. Okay. That's going to start you over. Just go forward. Thank you for, just hit it twice. Friendship and then kindness. Kindness projects or servant evangelism. Have you heard of random acts of kindness? Okay. If you go to servantevangelism.com, you can see a million ideas of ways to reach into the community that are very simple. Here's some ideas of what we've done. We used to hand out water bottles, and we would put a rubber band around the water bottle, slip a business card into it that said on one side that they saw initially, we just wanted to show you God's love in a practical way, no strings attached. On the back of the card was information about the church, what time the services were, a map to it. Okay? A lot of information on the back side. And what we would do is we would go on Sabbath after church, we would go down to the soccer fields where all the soccer moms are, and we would pass out water bottles. They're all hot. They're all sweaty. The kids are hot and sweaty. And we'd give them a water bottle with the card facing up. We just wanted to show you God's love in a practical way. No strings attached. And we would pass those out. We were standing in front of the county fairgrounds one time on a Sabbath afternoon passing out water bottles. And I've got a cooler, and my kids were coming and getting, and I'm just handing them to my kids while they were passing them out. And the cooler's full of ice and full of cold waters, and I'm just handing them as fast as I can. My kids are handing them out as fast as they can. And a lady stops and she says to me, "Who's doing this?" I said, "We're a church. We're called," this is the name of the church in Colorado, "we're called The Adventure." And she says, "I've heard of you guys." And I was like, yes. You know, because all of a sudden we were being noted for serving kindness into the community. You see where I'm going? And so the idea behind it is if we could build friendship in the community and then begin to serve the community in small ways. We handed out 9-volt batteries door to door with a card taped to it that said we wanted to show you God's love in a practical way. We just wanted to remind you to change your smoke alarm batteries and do it once a year. And it was like, who hands out 9-volt batteries? I've got friends that have gone into gas stations and said, we want to do a gas buy down. And so they'll lower the cost of the gas 20 cents a gallon. And they'll be out pumping the gas for the people. This is, again, in Colorado, where it was self-serve gas everywhere. And so they bought the price of the gas down and paid the gas station for that extra that they were losing. And they were doing it as a random act of kindness. The guy that developed this is a guy by the name of Steve Sjogren. He was a pastor of the Vineyard Church in Cincinnati, Ohio. And Cincinnati, Ohio is noted for a business that you may have heard of before, Hustler Magazine. Are you familiar with it? I hope you're not too familiar with it, but you understand what I'm saying. One of the things that they used to do is they would go in and clean toilets in restaurants and businesses, and they had their own buckets, their own mops, and they would clean the bathrooms. And one day he said, if I'm going to get my church to hand out water bottles, they're not going to go any farther than I am, so I'm going to take the worst job out there. And Steve Sjogren, the senior pastor, is a church of 10,000 people, would go in and he'd clean toilets. One day, he said, you know where I'm going to go clean toilets? I'm going to go to Hustler Magazine and clean toilets. And he did. Now, interestingly enough, they had the ladies don't know anything about this, but guys know, okay? In the urinals, there's these little screens where they put the mints on top, you know what I'm talking about? He had them printed up with his own name on the Vineyard Community Church. And so when men are standing there going to the bathroom, they saw that the toilets were cleaned by the church, okay? Now, that's a little extreme, okay? But he goes into Hustler Magazine, he cleans toilets for once a month for about a year and a half. And one day he's getting on an airplane, and who should be on the plane but Larry Flint, the owner of Hustler Magazine. Now, Larry Flint had been shot by a Christian. He had been targeted and shot, and he was paralyzed from the waist down because of it. And Larry Flint had this real gravelly voice. I don't even know if he's alive anymore, but he had this real gravelly voice. And so, but he's in a wheelchair, so and he's probably flying first class, and they wheel him in first, and he gets in one of the big seats. And Steve Sjogren, as he's walking back to coach class, Larry Flint's sitting there, and Larry Flint says, I know who you are. He says, you do? You're the guy that cleans my toilets. He says, I'd love to talk to you. And they made a lunch appointment right there as they stood on the airplane. Can you imagine? I mean, see, if we're in the community doing service in the community, you know what kind of impact that has? Because all of a sudden, if there are people in this community that say, I've got a friend that goes to that church. He's a great guy. And that church, they're always doing nice stuff in the community. They're always serving in the community. They're always helping people. You know what I'm saying? And that leads us then to the next step, and there we go, to Bridge, where we do bridge events. A bridge event is where you do something in the church. It could be in the auditorium sanctuary area. It could be in the fellowship hall. But the goal is to bring people into the church for a non-religious function. It might be a banquet. It might be a fundraiser. It might be a stop smoking clinic, a vegetarian cooking school. It might be a Financial Peace University, Dave Ramsey's class, something like that. You know, something to get them into the church that is not about religion necessarily. Now, I'm not saying you never talk about God. If you're going to do a health class, you're going to say, you know, part of the reason we do this, and you could read the scripture, but the goal of the health class isn't to get people converted. Would you agree with me? It's to bridge them into the church. Because now, listen to me. If they say, I have a friend that goes to that church, and I see that church serving in the community all over the place, and I've been to a couple things at their church. See where that's going? See how that's beginning to open doors? Then if we go to the next step, and it is about sowing, we do some sowing kinds of events, which would be maybe we do a mail out for asking people if they'd like Bible studies. We might do some door-to-door work. We might bring in the Youth Rush canvassing kids to go door-to-door selling books. Those are sowing kinds of things where we're specifically targeting religious things going on. And we're asking people to make some decisions. But it's small decisions. It's small, but if I can get you involved in a Bible study, you're much more prepared for an evangelistic meeting when it comes along. Isn't that right, Jerry? Sure. Yeah. And so the idea behind it is if we can do some of these things, build a friendship. Oh, those are nice people. I see them serving in the community. I've even been to their things. And I know somebody that's studying the Bible with that group of people down there, or I might be in that Bible study. The next logical step then is to go and have a reaping series of meetings. That's an evangelistic series. If they've come to a financial class, if they've come to a parenting class, there was a John Pauline, who used to teach at the seminary, now is at Loma Linda University, the head of the religion department at Loma Linda. He wrote a book years ago in the late 80s called Present Truth in the Real World. And he shared about a survey of a church in Seattle area that wanted to find a way to reach their community with a bridge event kind of ministry. And so how can we reach out to those kind of people? And they did a survey of their community. It was an upscale neighborhood. And guess what? The number one thing that came out of that survey was that those people wanted. They didn't know how to change diapers. Yeah. This is not Pampers, okay, where you peel the Velcro back and stick it. This is pins and needles. You've put on cloth diapers, haven't you? We did cloth diapers on our first kid just because we thought we were kind of eco-friendly. And I said, never again. It didn't make a bit of sense to me. I'd much rather throw those things away than wash them. But they didn't know how to change diapers. So that church held a diaper changing class and 20 or 30 people showed up for it. Can you imagine? It blows my mind. But what if we understood the demographics of our community so that the bridge events matched what they were looking for? See, traditionally, Adventists have done two things for bridge events. You know what they are? Stop smoking clinics and vegetarian cooking schools. Okay? Now, you may be far enough away from Portland that vegetarian cooking schools isn't as beneficial as it might be in Northeast Portland today. Okay? If you have a church in Northeast Portland and you do a cooking school on veganism, you'll probably get a crowd because it has become a hot spot of vegan. Now, you might not be that far out of Portland that you still have some lingering effects of it, but sometimes this far out you can lose some of that. But is that the most effective thing for reaching McMinnville? And that's what you have to figure out through demographic studies, through surveys. There's all kinds of ways to do it. The idea is, again, you build friendship, you serve in the community, and people are going, I know people that go to that church, they're always doing nice things. They're doing kindness kinds of things. And I've been to a class at their church. It was on parenting. It was on marriage. It was on financial accountability. It was on, changing diapers or whatever it might be. And I signed up for some Bible studies there. And I'm kind of enjoying what their Bible studies. I think I'll go to that Revelation thing that they're having at their church. It looks really interesting. The goal, the backbone of all of that is to keep them. Right? Now, we're going to talk in a few minutes about the myths of Adventist evangelism. One of the myths is, I'll tell you right up front, is that they all leave within the first year. You've heard that myth, haven't you? Okay? I used to believe that myth. I used to believe that my family was the only family that stayed a year after we were baptized. I no longer believe that myth. The numbers at my church we're keeping about 70, 72, and sometimes up to 75% of the people we baptize. And we could talk about that a little bit in a few minutes. But the North American Division just published numbers in February. And I was at a meeting in Washington, D.C. or Maryland at the division headquarters. And they said, we're keeping 65% of the people nationwide. Now, Jose Cortez Jr., who's in charge of evangelism at the NAD, he was disappointed in that number. He said, we should be doing better. Here's what I said to him afterwards at a break. How many of you are baseball fans? Anybody a baseball fan? Okay. I said, Jose, do you play baseball? He says, of course. And I said, if you're a batter and you got to hit 65% of the time, would you be in the Hall of Fame? He says, absolutely. You know, you realize that the Hall of Fame people are batting 25% of the time. They get a hit 25% of the time. The rest of the time they strike out or pop up. 25% of the time they get a hit, they could be in the Hall of Fame. That's a good batter. 330% would be an excellent batter. 65%, we'd all like 100%. 65% is something to stand up and cheer about. Okay? It breaks the myth that nobody stays. And so I want you to just think about that for a little bit, because that basic backdrop is there is a way to keep people, and there is a way to make it happen. And I talk about that in my book. I won't take the time to do that right now. Let's see. The Great Commission. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And remember, I am with you always to the end of the age. Jesus has given us the authority, hasn't he? To go, to reach the community, to get out. And so that pyramid is a basic structure of reaching people. This is a continuum of life, two sides of this continuum. Evangelism is to the left, and discipleship is to the right. In the middle is the cross. And what I like to say, this was designed, this is an adaptation of a guy by the name of Engel. He did a scale, he called it the Engel scale, where it had exactly 7 steps leading up to the cross and 7 steps after the cross. The idea behind it is that if we can move people closer to the cross, then we are one step closer to getting them to a decision. We don't have to get people, if they're clear down here, we're not going to get them to make a decision for the cross immediately. You understand what I'm saying? We might get them to go from here to here by doing friendship. Maybe we get them to go from here to here because we do kindness projects, and from here we do some sewing, and then we do a bridge event, and we reap them. See what I'm saying? Each one of those pyramidal steps is seeking to get people one step closer. What we do follow up to that is about discipleship. Now, when people tell me, I'm quoting Chuck Burkeen, who's the ministerial director of this conference. Chuck said one time, people tell him, nobody comes anymore. Evangelism didn't work. He says, it sounds to me like evangelism did work. You baptized 15 people. Sounds to me like the church didn't work. Now, that makes me stop and rethink what we're doing in church, okay? Or at least it ought to. If it's true that a year after baptism, nobody's there, what did we do wrong? It's not the evangelist's fault. He did his job, okay? Here's the deal. If you were to tip this on edge, and I didn't make a slide for that, but if this was like climbing a mountain, what do you do when you get to the top of a mountain? Let's see if I can get that to advance. Go ahead and... This is... Let's see. That's my daughter, that's my son-in-law, that's my daughter, that's my wife and I. And that's at the top of Mount St. Helens this last May. We had an absolute blast. And if I wanted to regale you with stories, I would show you a whole bunch of videos that I shot while we were sliding down the mountain, because you don't hike down a mountain, you slide down it. And it's the most fun in the whole world. I mean, honestly, it is just a blast. But here's the point. Go ahead and go forward again for me, please. Thank you. That's the crater. I don't know why I needed to put more pictures in. Go again. There you go. If this is climbing the mountain, where am I? This is climbing the mountain to the cross and coming back down the mountain. What do you do when you get off the mountain? Anybody here a mountain climber? Anybody here a hiker? When you climb up something, when I come back down, I want to tell somebody about it. I've taken pictures. I want to show pictures, right? My family took up rock climbing here a few years ago, and we go out, and I send pictures out to all my friends. Look what we just did. What would it be like if, as people come to the Lord, we encourage them when they got back down to the last stage of discipleship, not to just sit on their tails in church for the next 50 years, but to go tell somebody about it. You see what I'm saying? To me, it seems pretty crucial that we turn the church into a place that shares the good news, right? And so the idea of a culture of evangelism and outreach, would you advance it one more time, is to go back down the mountain. A lot of people in this community are looking for a place to go, and everybody is telling them what to do and where to go. I believe we're the only ones with the answers, okay? When I say we are, I'm saying Christians are the only ones with the answers that are worth listening to. This is not a political statement, okay? Trump doesn't have the answers, okay? This is not a political statement. Obama didn't have the answers. The business world doesn't have the answers. Do you hear what I'm saying? Christians have the answers. And we are hurting ourselves, and we are hurting God's cause when we keep it to ourselves. Ellen White says in Steps to Christ, this is a paraphrase, she says, in saving others, we save ourselves. If you want to grow deeper in your own spiritual walk, start sharing your own faith. So, think with me about the demoniacs, okay? And we're going to do this, and we're going to take a little break. Think of the demoniacs. Jesus goes across the Sea of Galilee. He lands in the Decapolis area and in the Gadarenes. And here, depends on who you listen to, there was one or two demoniacs, right? I think I heard it best why there's a discrepancy there. The disciples were such in shock that one of them just turned and ran and didn't see the second one, okay? But think about it. They all turn and they run. Oh my goodness, these are guys that are chained up and they break the chains. These are not little chains for pocket watches. These are major chains, and they break the chains because they're demonic power behind them. They're screaming, they're cutting themselves, and they're running around naked, and they're scaring everybody. And when the disciples turn around, they've got to the boat, and they're probably 5 foot off the shore already, and they're like, wait, where's Jesus? And they look back, and those two demoniacs are sitting at the feet of Jesus. And you know the story, right? It was the first Bay of Pigs disaster, right? And they send the pigs over the edge. And the people were so scared of Jesus with the power like that, they said, please, this is too much. Go away. And the demoniacs come to Jesus and says, please, let me be one of your disciples. And Jesus says, I want you to go home and tell people about what God has done for you. Don't miss this, okay? He didn't say, go become Doug Batchelor and have all the answers, okay? He didn't say, go become Mark Finley and become a great preacher. He didn't say, go to seminary. He says, just go tell what God has done for you. You know how long that guy's testimony was? That long. Right? But everybody knew his story, right? Everybody knew it. And all he had to do was say, Jesus did that for me. And they're like, tell me some more. He didn't have to know everything. We don't have to know everything to go make friends for Jesus, do we? I want to tell you one more story, because I said I was going to stop at that one for a break. I got to tell you this one. I preached about friendship evangelism for a couple weeks in a row in Colorado. And one of my church members loved parties and loved the concept of Matthew parties, and he absolutely loved it. And before he really got into it, this is a guy that I used to have to call on Sabbath mornings and say, "Are you out of bed yet? You need to get your tail down to church," And he was just kind of just on the edge. He grew up in a semi-Adventist home, but they grew pot, and they were, he got kicked out of Gem State Academy, and he got kicked out of a couple of different schools. You're not your finest Adventists here, okay? But when we started this church from scratch, he says, "I want to join you." And I literally had to call him and say, "Get out of bed. It's time to get to church." And one day I preached about friendship evangelism, and the next week he came to me, and he says, "I did it." I said, "You did what?" "The friendship thing." I said, "What do you mean the friendship thing?" He says, "Well, Roland and Stacy, it's a couple we had met in the park. My wife had actually met her, and we babysat their kids, and we got to do some things with them, and we'd introduce them to some of our Christian friends." He says, "We took Roland and Stacy out drinking and dancing Friday night." I grabbed him by the collar, and I pulled him in close. I said, "You did what?" I knew him well enough to do that, okay? I said, "You missed something, Shane." He says, "What do you mean?" I said, "You missed the redemptive side of the friendship." "What do you mean?" I said, "It's not just about going being a friend and going down to their level. It's about asking them to come up to your level." Friendship, reaching into the community, is not just about getting into all the stuff that they get into. It's about reaching them in a redemptive way that you can pull them out. And he says, "Oh no, I screwed it up, didn't I?" I said, "Yeah, you did, and I'm going to pray for you." and here's the deal. He got it, though. At that point, it clicked with him. He heard the friendship side of it because that's his natural tendency. He heard that, but he missed the redemptive side of it, the friendship evangelism side of it, the redemptive friendship side of it. He missed the redemption side of it, but that time it clicked with him. Shane's a pastor today. And, it's a great story. If I had time, I'd share it all with you. It's a tremendous story how his conversion led him to become somebody who was constantly reaching into people's lives with the story of Jesus, not with drinking and dancing. The first time I told that story, I was up front at Andrews University and Don Schneider was interviewing me. And he got to that point and he cut me off. He wouldn't let me finish the story. And I thought, oh, great, he thinks I'm just in favor of drinking and dancing. I'm not, okay? So anyway, let's take a 5-minute break, and I'm going to see if I can get my PowerPoint keynote stuff loaded up a little better, see what will work, and we will reload here in a second. How's that? Okay?
The Evangelism linebacker deals directly with a variety of students' fears associated with sharing their faith.
All right, it's all you. This house has got your name on it.
I'm not ready yet.
What makes you think I'm ready, though?
Fear of rejection, for example.
Let me talk to you about fear. 4th and 1, Jerry Rice, what you gonna do? That don't compare to 4th and 1 in eternity.
It doesn't matter who rejects us because we're always accepted by Christ.
God loves you. Get off the floor and go door to door.
Can we talk to you for a minute?
I'm a lover, not a fighter, baby.
He loves you, but it might hurt.
Sometimes I'll blow you up, but it's because I love you.
Yeah, but just because I'm a Christian doesn't mean I need to be out sharing my faith. I mean,
Don't you run from me! You can't escape my grasp! D. Gray will throw you in the trash!
Thanks to the Evangelism linebacker, campus evangelism nationwide is up 87%.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. I'll never do it again.
Hey, I can't go to the outreach today. I just got some more important things I gotta do. Uh-huh. Hey man, give me a break. I went to church on Sunday. I gotta go.
Selfishness? The world needs a message. For God to love the world, He wants to communicate it through you.
If you procrastinate, you will open up the gate to a beatdown. Give me that phone, boy. When I see selfishness, it is my job to blow them up. That's what I do. I blow them up so that they can get their eyes off of self and look at Christ, the prize.
What's up, baby girl? Nah, I'm busy.
We're intrigued, as the linebacker is particularly effective in infiltrating centers of cultural and intellectual exchange.
Here you go. Here's your double cappuccino latte mocha with a twist. Not too hot, not too cold. Perfect for you.
But anyway, man, did you hear that talk from that guy the other night?
Oh, I know. Like we were supposed to be sharing our faith in like coffee shop.
Whoa! Whoa! Shut out in the coffee shop, baby! You next!
It's unlikely that the recent decline in coffee sales has anything to do with our program.
Pride comes before the fall. That's Old Testament. Old Testament, you know this.
Thanks for the coffee, Darren.
Hey, you're welcome. Have a nice day. Your mama raised you better than this boy. Don't let me blow you up no more. You see, I think it's fitting because when people have pride, if they're too prideful to share their faith, what I do is I knocks the pride out of them. What I would like to communicate to my brothers and sisters is this. When you least expect it, around the corner, perhaps even under your bed, I can be in a phone wire. I can be everywhere. And just know that I'm always watching, ready to lay the boom on you, baby. Booyah!
Ouch. Are you ready for game day?
So, I hope we do evangelism a little differently than that, right? Although sometimes after an evangelist comes through, we sometimes feel a little beat up like that, right? Yeah, see, look under your pews, see if he's back there. Darren Gray used to play professional football, and he is now a pastor. I think of a Baptist church of some sort, a variety, but I laugh every time I see that video. So, does evangelism work? I want to show you for the next half hour or so why I believe evangelism does still work, and then we'll close up with a little bit about the myths of evangelism. Okay. And so we'll see if we can make this work, and it does. Look at that. There are 4 basic quadrants of life. We do not know where this source is from. My conference president, Rocky Mountain Conference, gave me this grid, and we talked about it, and I said, oh, I get where it's going. He heard it from a psychology class when he was going to Andrews University back in the 70s, and we could not trace the source down. I'll leave that much to you. It's not original with me, but I'm going to just walk you through the 4 basic things here that, at least I think I am. Okay? There's chaos, structure, principles, and I just got to slow down, and integration. 4 basic patterns of life that all of us go through or have gone through. And there is a pattern by which we go through them. We start in chaos, we move towards structure. That leads us into principles, and that takes us down into life integration. Okay? The primary reason evangelism works is because most of the people that we reach are in chaos. Okay? Most people, Adventism by and large, is very good at reaching people in the lower socioeconomic standard of living and raising them up. Do you understand where I'm going with this? When people become Seventh-day Adventists, they often are smokers, drinkers. They don't make enough money. They're serving in a capacity that they're just in chaos. They've just gone through a divorce. They've just moved across the country. They've just become empty nesters. They've just had a child. Those are all chaos kinds of things. Does that make sense? If you get married, that's chaos. If you're married, you know what I'm talking about, right? I'm not saying that all chaos is bad. I'm saying that chaos is stress. It's the kind of things that load us down. It's the kind of things that keep us we're not quite sure what to do, all right? And so the majority of the people we reach are in a lower socioeconomic standard of living. They are in chaos. What do we do when they become Adventists? We teach them about Adventist schools. We teach them to get off their cigarettes, off their alcohol, which gives them more money in their pocket. We send them to schools. I just said that, but schools, we're a big believer in education. Education tends to raise your socioeconomic standard of living, okay? And so the majority of Adventists aren't in a lower socioeconomic standard. We've come out of chaos. How do we do that? We bring them to an evangelistic series that provides a structure. What is the structure? Well, we provide them the Sabbath, the state of the dead, the second coming. We give them a structure of belief. See where I'm going? And so we take people who are in chaos, we lay out our fundamental belief system about Christ and how we live as Adventists, and we take them down this path, and we give them a structure by which to order their chaos. And when you can order your chaos, you go, and it feels right. Okay? When I told you that we're keeping 65 to 75% of the people that become Adventists across North America, the majority of people that we reach come from an unchurched category with our public evangelism. Most of the people that come to our evangelism are not churched at the time they come. Now, most of them have a churched background. They used to go to church. They were raised in church. They believe in God. They have some former structure that they used to be a part of, but they've laid off that structure for whatever reason. Those people who come to our evangelism, who are already currently members of another church, we have a harder time hanging on to them. And the reason being is because their social framework is back at their other church. Their structure is back at their other church. And so they come because they want to learn more about the Bible, not because they're in chaos. They come because they want to learn more about the Bible, and they come and they learn some new things, and they're convicted by it, so they make a decision and get baptized. And they're like, well, now what do I do? Because all my friends are still over there. And my financial strings are over there because I have business relationships at that other church. And their structure is over there. We actually don't hang on to most of those people. The people that we lose tend to be from a churched category. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't try to reach them. I think we have a better system of belief than anybody else out there. If I didn't believe that, I wouldn't be a Seventh-day Adventist minister. I'm not saying it's perfect, and I'm not saying the others are all wrong. I'm just saying I like ours better. But we take people from chaos and we give them a structure. After about 3 to 5 years, those people move from structure into principles, and they begin to operate their life based on life principles. And so no longer do they keep the Sabbath because God said keep the Sabbath. Now they keep the Sabbath because God said keep the Sabbath, but also they find it life-changing and life rejuvenating to keep the Sabbath. No longer are they vegetarians just because that's what Adventists do at potlucks. They've now understood that's part of who I'm a better person if I live like that. Does that make sense? And so they've moved into principles. They are now 2 steps away from chaos. After about, let's say a generation, they move into integration. So when my mom was raised an Adventist, it wasn't because she believed anything differently. It wasn't because she came out of chaos. It was just part of who she was. See? My kids are growing up like that to some degree. I'm trying to integrate principles into their life, and I do enough chaos into their life because I just cause chaos in my life, in our family's life. But I'm trying to integrate principles into their life so they understand it more than just it's who I am. Integration can easily shift into cultural Adventism. See? And that's only going to take the next generation out back into chaos. Do you understand what I'm saying? So we bring people through chaos and structure, and we give them a structure. 3 to 5 years out, they are now living on the concept of principles. Now, here's the deal. The average Seventh-day Adventist who has been a Seventh-day Adventist for longer than 7 years has no close personal friends outside of the church. Okay? The average Seventh-day Adventist really has nobody they call as a close friend in a time of trouble. They call people who are in the church. They don't have anybody to rely on outside because they are now living in principles. They're far away from where they used to be in chaos. Now, in some degrees, that's a good thing, because statistically what happens, if you don't have 7 close personal friends in the church after a year, you're not staying. You are all still here, right? So you were either, I'm going to guess, either raised an Adventist or made some close friends in the church and you stayed. That's what happened to me. Now, I had to ask myself the first time I heard that, do I have 7 close friends in this church? And I didn't. But then I thought of my friends that lived across the country that I called every week to talk on the phone. I thought of my friends that I'd gone to college with, and I thought of other pastors who I met with periodically. And I said, well, I do have 7 close friends. They just were not in the same community, you see. And so the idea is that if you notice, if you go to a church board, the average pastor can tell you, if I go to the church board and say, we want to do evangelism, the church board says, oh, we don't like those 5-night-a-week things. According to this chart, why is it? They're not in chaos and they don't need the structure. See, I tell my church all the time, I say, you may not like evangelism, but guess what? You're not the target. You're not the target of what we're trying to do. And so if you go, I have several evangelist friends, and I think Doug Batchelor has done this. He'll lay out brochures in front of a church board. Which brochure do you like? Which one do you like the best, and which one do you hate the most? Oh, we hate this one with the beasts. Okay? We like this one with Jesus on the front. And Doug Batchelor will tell you, other evangelists will tell you, that the brochure that the average church member, Adventist church member likes is a brochure that won't work. And the brochure that they hate is the one that will. According to this chart, why? Because they're not in chaos. They're making their decision based on living in principles. See what I'm saying? And so I've got a guy in my church who helps design brochures, and we work with a local company to get our brochures printed, and he understands this, but I got people that just can't stand it because we haven't used beasts as much, but current events, and they look scary. Like the latest one that this company's done, a friend of mine, they're going to do it at Stone Tower Church in March, and my friend sent me an email. He goes to that church, and he says, it reminded me of the movie Apocalypse Now and the posters for that. And I don't know if you remember the movie Apocalypse Now, but it was very dark thematically, very, and the brochure looks like that. And I said, do the church members like it? No, they don't really like it. I said, it'll probably work then. and it's simply a matter of who we are. We, as Adventists, we grew up or became part of a structure. I mean, think about it. How many of you went to Adventist high school? Okay? And in Adventist high school, your sophomore year, what do you learn? It's Bible doctrines, right? And so in Bible class, you're learning a structure of belief. We're very good at that as Adventists, aren't we? We have a very structured belief system. We understand what we believe. We can show it very clearly. I mean, I get people all the time that come to evangelism, and they'll say to me, they'll be convicted by the Sabbath. You can see it in their eyes. They're convicted by it, and they've checked the card that they're convicted by it. And then they come back the next night, and they say, I talked to my pastor. I said, oh, yeah? Would you talk to my pastor? I know what they're trying to say. They're trying to say, talk to my pastor. He'll show you that this Sabbath thing isn't correct. You know what my response is? Bring it on, baby. I mean, our structure of belief is unbeatable. Honestly, if you want to just use Scripture as a guideline and you want to talk about the Sabbath, bring it on, because there's nothing can stand in its place. Am I correct? Okay, so I'm not scared of that because of our structure. We learn structure very well as Adventists. But when we get to the stage of principles, we're growing in our principles. The reason Adventist evangelism works is because we're reaching people in chaos, and you and I are not in that chaos. Now, you may be experiencing chaos, and you will find every evangelistic series you do, church members will get rebaptized. Oftentimes, it's because of their own personal chaos that they're going through you may not know anything about. It might be a chaos of belief, like they're doubting what they believe. It might be that they've been living in chaos because they know what they believe, but they're just not following through with it personally. You know, they're addicted to a substance that nobody knows about, or you know, it might just be something really benign that you and I would say, that's nothing. But they're under conviction, and that conviction is a product of living in some chaos. And when an Adventist evangelist comes around, he'll baptize and rebaptize some of your Adventist members who have been members for 40, 50 years sometimes. Oftentimes it's because he's provided a structure of spirituality that they've enjoyed going to for 4 nights a week. Now, here's the interesting thing. We were doing an evangelistic series in Greeley, Colorado. And we were a church plant, and we had no facility of our own, so we always had to rent a facility. One time we rented the church that we were renting from. It was a Sunday church. And it was great to put their address and their name on the brochure because everybody thought that this charismatic Sunday church was holding these prophecy meetings, and so people showed up by the armloads, truckloads or whatever. And then, we taught them about the Sabbath. We taught them about the second coming. But we did this one meeting. We were meeting in the Adventist Academies or Junior Academy gymnasium. And this couple shows up. We had 2 time slots, and we had a 6 o'clock and a 7:30, or I forget the time. It might have been 5:30 and 7 time slot. So we were doing back-to-back meetings, exactly the same. So she would come to the early service, and he would come just before the early service was over with the kids and trade off, and she'd take the kids and go home, and he'd listen. Their kids could not sit in a meeting that long. They couldn't even go to the kids program where you're up and down and playing and doing games and watching and singing. They couldn't even do that because they were not used to any kind of thing like that at all. Aaron and Stacy came night by night by night, and they came every night. And you could tell they were enjoying what they were listening to. And they were convicted of what they were doing. But we couldn't get any information from them. I'd go up to Aaron and I'd say, Aaron, hey, how's it going? He's friendly. He talked to us. He'd speak, he'd stand around and talk and ask questions about the Bible. So we knew he was engaging. His body language was all about engagement. One day I said to him, Aaron, what do you do? I'm in business. I'm like, woo, what was that? He's really hiding something. And I didn't know what was going on. And at it was the last week of the meetings. The evangelist, a guy by the name of Hiram Rester, and I, we sat him down. Aaron, what's going on? We know you like this. We know you're convicted by this. We know that there's something really positive about this. What's going on? He goes like this. Okay, here goes. He says, I own a strip club. I thought, did he say strip mall? No, he said strip club. Brass pole, dancers, that whole deal. He grew up, that's what his dad did for work. And he inherited the business. He and his 4 brothers. He says, but here's the deal. My dad just died. And my stepmom and us are in a legal battle as to who controls the business. As soon as I can get control of the business, I can close it and sell it and get out of it. I can't legally even get out of the business right now. So I want to get baptized, but I can't get baptized. It's a fascinating story because in the middle of this seminar, he calls his half-brother, who was also raised in the strip club business. And his brother goes, what kind of meetings are you going to? His brother's at Andrews University going to the seminary. He'd become an Adventist and was going to the seminary. And he said, what kind of meetings are you going to? It sounds like you're in a cult. You know, I mean, he didn't know we were Adventists. He didn't know his little brother was attending an Adventist meeting that he was trying to become an Adventist evangelist to do. And so he's almost trying to talk him out of it. But finally, he just acquiesced, said, just be careful, Aaron, just be careful. Aaron comes along. In the end, it took him 4 years, and they finally got baptized because they finally sold the business. He flew out to St. Louis, where Hiram Rester was pastoring, not St. Louis, but into Missouri. What's the town? Anyway, flew into Missouri and got baptized. Surprised Hiram. Hiram didn't know he was coming. And he gave Hiram and he gave me a copy of a key to the strip club. You don't know very many pastors with a key to the strip club, I bet. I told that to my staff one day, and our Bible worker, she said to me, well, not some that's so forthright about it. But he gave it to us as a memento to say, I never want you to forget that what you did is life-changing. Now here, it's not just life-changing. Some people want us to be more involved in evangelism or less involved in public evangelism because they want us to do something for the community. Aaron sold his strip club to a church, and they turned it into a church. It was the only strip club in Fort Collins, Colorado. 5 years later, there are still no strip clubs in Fort Collins, Colorado. Evangelism works, okay? Do you hear what I'm saying? Evangelism not only changes individuals' lives, it changes communities. Think about it with me for a moment. If you got a family that's in chaos, and they're doing drugs, and their marriage is about to fall apart, and they come to the meetings and they get baptized, and they get off drugs, and they quit spending money on alcohol, and now they're paying their debts, does that change the community? Absolutely it does. And I could tell you story after story where that has happened. We baptized a couple one time, and their son and their daughter. He showed up opening night. This is that same series in Sweet Home where 350 people showed up opening night. He came to me opening night. He says, you're the pastor here. And I said, yeah, I am. And he says, I want to get baptized. I said, great. What's your name? And he tells me his name. I want to get baptized. And what I said to him, I said, well, that's awesome. You know, we're planning a baptism in just a few weeks at the end of this seminar. Let's talk as we get closer. Because, I mean, I've had people over the years tell me they want to get baptized, and then I never see them again. You know, I didn't know who this guy was. It was opening night of the seminar. There was 350 people in this church that sat 250 people. I mean, it was a crazy evening, and he tells me he wants to get baptized. I'm like, yeah, right. Yeah, don't go to Pastor Roger if you want somebody with faith, right? So, but we baptized him. He got off drugs. He got off alcohol, stopped abusing his kids. His marriage was saved. All of a sudden, his concrete construction business began to boom and thrive, partly because he was getting his job done instead of not showing up because he was hungover, right? And so part of it was just getting stuff done around the community. But when I'd go try to see him, I'd stop in to make a pastoral visit on his work schedule or something. And I'd say, where's Vince? And his construction workers, they're down there hammering forms together, you know, doing what concrete guys do. He's over there. He's over sitting on the tailgate of his truck giving a Bible study to the concrete guy that's been delivering concrete. Now, Vince went on to move out of the area of Sweet Home, and he moved to, I want to say, Christmas Valley, which is not a hotbed of growth, okay? And he planted a church. And then he moved out of there and he moved to east of Eugene. I forget the name of the small community. And he planted another church. And he wants to plant another church. All because evangelism reached into chaos to help somebody move their life along the road. It's had a huge impact, hasn't it? So evangelism works. I could tell you story after story after story. But it's this idea that we go from chaos into structure, into principles. Now, it's a fine line between integration turning to the right or turning back to the left into chaos again. My parents went from principles Their parents were in principles, and they joined Adventism, if you will, into integration. And they both turned left and went back into chaos. The goal, of course, would be to get our kids that their life is integrated not just with Adventism, but with Jesus Christ. Okay? And so I think that's hugely important to understand. And people tell me all the time that it doesn't work. I show them this chart to explain why it does still work.